One Piece is a series people often avoid in the West, with the anime manga scene mainly being dominated by things like Dragon Ball, Naruto, Bleach, etc., with me being one of those people that avoided it for a very long time. But it was always popular in Japan, becoming the greatest selling manga of all time, with basically just Japan solo carrying the title, and it has been on the up in the West at least the past few years since Naruto and Bleach finished. Now, while I haven't finished One Piece, I have finished a decent chunk of it, around 220 chapters, which goes up to the end of an arc called Alabasta. This is about 1/5 of the entire series at the moment, and I think it's enough for me to answer the question, is One Piece worth getting into? I am not going to be judging all of One Piece in this, but only really the beginning parts, as I think for most people, the biggest turnoff of One Piece is its introduction, with many people calling it boring or dragged out or just flat out bad. Many think the first part of One Piece is actually up to chapter 75, or the end of Arlong Park in East Blue, which is sort of like the real first arc of One Piece completed, with the next milestone being Alabasta around the 200s. So I'm going to go over pretty much both of them. One Piece begins with Luffy wanting to become the Pirate King and finding 10 crewmates for his ship. This is the basic goal Oda is going to build his story around, and Dragon Ball's original goal was to find the 7 Dragon Balls, Naruto's was to become Hokage, and Bleach's is more complicated, and Hunter x Hunter's is to find Gon's dad. Many shonen tend to have the basic driving force that allows authors to easily follow up with and construct their world and plot around what it means to achieve a goal. The side characters of these series are often even more simple. In Dragon Ball, Bulma just wants a boyfriend as an example, but sometimes these secondary characters become massively important to the story and become just straight up deuterogonists, or characters with even more build up than the protagonist. For example, take Sasuke's ambitions of him wanting to take out his brother, Kurapika wanting to get the Phantom Troop, etc. One Piece takes this to the next level, with each character having their own goal that will take pretty much as much time to accomplish as Luffy. Zoro wanting to become the world's strongest swordsman, Nami wanting to map the world, Usopp wanting to become a great warrior, and yes, this is actually hard for him to do considering he is kind of like a normal human level guy in a superhuman world. Chopper wanting to create impossible medicines, and Sanji wanting to find the mysterious all blue, etc. Whereas in Naruto, really only Sasuke has an ambition that even remotely rivals Naruto's outside of mainly the antagonist, and a lot of the crew in One Piece are characters that will require a lot of build up and development to reach their goals. Compared to Bleach as well, many characters tend to fall completely flat compared to the ambitions of One Piece characters. Not to say they are all bad or poorly done, just not as nearly as interesting compared to, say, Ichigo is in his own story. Even Usopp's pretty generic I want to be a great warrior goal is actually something that you root for him to do, say compared to Naruto's Sakura, as Sakura is actually kind of considered a hyper-intelligent ninja who passed like with perfect grades, who just was too normal or pampered to be strong earlier in the story, and Usopp was always a dude who lied to impress people and did goofy things to try and seem tough and get attention, but was never noted as any type of prodigy. So when you see him actually using his raw hard work and his goofy quirks to come up in the world, it actually feels pretty good to see, rather than, oh, she actually got a buff. That's cool. This may seem like a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important for kind of establishing what Oda wants to do with One Piece. He wants everything and pretty much everyone to matter. He doesn't want it to become the Goku, Naruto, or Ichigo show. He wants it to be the Straw Hats, a whole group of protags basically, and everything builds up to this. Take for instance all those mini arcs when we are introduced to Zoro, Usopp, Nami, and Sanji. Only Nami is not really on board fully with the Straw Hats, but she accompanies them. They all have very strong characters and goals, and Zoro will starve himself to complete a deal. Sanji will feed anybody no matter how terrible they treat him or are. Usopp will overcome all his fears, lies, and do anything to help his friends even though he's extremely weak. And Nami tends to always be true to herself, which is hating pirates and taking from them. So by the time you get to Arlong Park, these mini arcs introducing these characters become a main arc, where we finally see all the crew so far come together and see what they can accomplish. So in a series full of strong characters that stay very true to themselves the entire time, to have a character like Nami suddenly finally break and beg Luffy for help with tears, and have all the Straw Hats do a rap album pose as they walk off to beat up the person that's ruling Nami's island, you start to feel attached to the series. You start to kind of get it. It starts to click. And at a certain point, after all these seemingly useless interactions, comments, and jokes from the characters being hard-headed and childish, you get to the point where you finally say, you know what? I actually like these guys. And for me, that happened around Whiskey Peak, which is around 110 or chapter 110. And there was a moment where the Straw Hats are basically greeted by a undercover bounty hunter group that feeds them and treats them like royalty to try and get them to pass out so they can rob them. Luffy passes out because he's Luffy, but other characters like Zoro and Nami don't fall for it. Zoro then takes on 100 bounty hunters by himself to protect the Straw Hat stuff, and then Luffy finally wakes up to see what Zoro did and then says, "I'm going to kill you, Zoro." And Zoro tries explaining what happened, explaining they're getting robbed, and Luffy just does not have any of it and doesn't believe him. Because people that do that good for Luffy could just never be bad people for Luffy. Now, normally you just say, oh, this is just I'll kill you as sort of like a unserious remark or gag scene. But no, he actually means it. Luffy actually tries to kill Zoro. And when that happens, that's when I was just like, bro, I just fucking love Luffy. And he's sort of a bit refreshing, if that makes sense. Compare Luffy just going 0 to 100 on Zoro to Goku watching Vegeta nuke a stadium of people and still be unsure if he wants to fight. If that was Luffy, he would have already been beating Vegeta's ass the moment he raised his arm at the crowd, if the crowd were people Luffy liked, of course. Now, Goku being more serious here isn't a bad thing, but you get the idea of how Luffy can be a little bit refreshing. So, chapter 75 or 115, that's when it snapped for you? Yeah, about where it clicked. So with that information, let's actually compare One Piece now to the others. What do the other series accomplish in about 75 or 115 chapters? For Dragon Ball, they're at the beginning of the Red Ribbon Army Saga, or in the Pirate Bay. Dragon Ball accomplishes its original idea of collecting the 7 Dragon Balls quite early, and is honestly even a bit more slow than One Piece for the most part, with a lot of interactions. But in Dragon Ball's defense, Dragon Ball is sort of pioneering and creating a whole genre basically, so I'll sort of give it a pass, with it being at the Tien Shinhan arc, or 22nd Budokai, by chapter 115. Naruto by 75 is in the middle of the Chunin exams, and at 115 it's completely done with them, leading into Konoha Crush. Naruto, I would honestly say, should be considered by most to be the ultimate battle shonen when it comes to its introduction and beginning. Even the first chapter is the most gripping, with it then leading immediately into Team Kakashi and the Bell Test, the Land of Waves arc with Zabuza and Haku, and then the entire Chunin exam. The Chunin exams introducing dozens of stories and characters in a single arc, like Rock Lee, Gaara, Neji, Shikamaru, Choji, and even Orochimaru, the first, second Hokages, and so on. Even Jiraiya is introduced in this arc, as well as Gamabunta and a whole Nine Tails power-up Kaioken form by basically chapter 100. And this almost all happens before Ichigo even enters Soul Society for the first time, and before One Piece even really gets to its first main arc as well. But this isn't to say Naruto is more worth it than One Piece, but it makes sense that out of all the big three, it stayed probably with the West the most. It is a lot easier to get into than the rest, and it does it all well. Kishimoto, the author of Naruto, when he began the series, was in his late 20s, and was mainly trying to pitch a story that Jump would take, with Jump's editors doing a lot for him to construct his premise and so forth. Then in Kishimoto's own words, his creativity, even for character designs, starts to die out by the time the Sasuke retrieval arc rolls around, even before chapter 200. So it's sort of like Kishimoto blows his whole creative load early and is hyper ambitious, with this ambition almost being impossible to follow up on later with the story he's trying to make, causing a lot of characters he introduced, like Lee, Neji, and so on, just eventually fade off as he has too many things he wants to do. Oda, on the other hand, has been dreaming of writing One Piece ever since he was a child, constantly building his world for many, many years until his early 20s, when he finally gave it to Jump. One Piece is sort of like that dream story every aspiring writer has when they are growing up, but Oda actually brings it to reality. Due to this, One Piece has everything ironed out. The entire world has pretty much been built and thought of in advance. So when Oda introduces a bunch of characters, it's highly likely he has a lot of plans for them and they will not fade away into obscurity. And as you read, that theory basically becomes fact. Almost every single thing Oda introduces has value and will mean something later. So unlike Naruto, where you will find yourself really hyped up for a character and then becoming a bit disappointed where a lot of them end up, One Piece doesn't really do that. But due to this, One Piece is also slower paced, like a lot slower paced at first, as it establishes all the groundwork for this late game story to come into action. An easy example is just right off the bat, compare Naruto's Konohamaru to One Piece's Kobe. Many people may not know this, but these two characters serve a pretty similar purpose, or at least were supposed to. You have these spurgy, almost annoying OC main characters then be plopped next to an actual child character to then show off their more admirable traits in contrast. Even this, I think One Piece did better, because Luffy, after chapter 1, kind of goes through a mini time skip and changes a bit where the reader doesn't really know him as well, so it's kind of more interesting. But that aside, even Kobe gets more love than Konohamaru by far, and in fact, he almost gets his entire own mini story every single chapter in a single image, so you can actually keep up with what he's doing without him interrupting the story or the pacing. Whereas Konohamaru just sort of randomly appears one day and uses Rasengan on Pain. Bleach, on the other hand, has almost really nothing notable happen in its first 75 chapters at all in comparison. So I'd say if you liked the first 75 or so of Bleach or thought they were really exciting, probably be really easily able to get into One Piece. Not to say One Piece is better than Bleach or whatever, I'm not trying to get into that type of argument, but I'd say out of all those examples, Bleach did the least with its start, with it sort of exploding in quality and entertainment during the Soul Society onward. So in terms of pacing, it's not actually that bad. So why don't people get into it then? I think even the whole pacing argument is a little strange, as if you want to be real, all of Death Note ends in 108 chapters. The entire series is done before Naruto finishes even the Chunin exams. The only reason I haven't mentioned it is because, well, it is a shonen, it isn't a battle shonen, but even then, its pacing is really insane comparatively. But people don't try to grandstand Death Note as the pacing overlord and say everything is too slow compared to it. So this is what I think is really the reason. Let's do an experiment. Go to any number randomizer online and then have it randomize anything from 1 through 500. Then have it randomize anything from 3 to 15. Well, this would be basically randomizing a chapter and a page. So you take the random chapter and page and then open it up for your battle shonen of choice, of course, if they have 500 chapters. Then you compare it to One Piece. About 8 out of 10 times, One Piece will have loads of writing and dialogue, exposition, compared to the series you chose. And I'm not joking, it is very consistently spammed with word bubbles and even somewhat hard to tell what's happening sometimes. But I don't think this is necessarily all a bad thing. I think it's supposed to be different. The reason I think it's more so different than bad is because I am 99% sure it is done intentionally and not out of bad writing practice or something. So hear me out. Although I do think the cluttered art is kind of hard to tell what's happening, and that's not as defendable as there being a lot of writing and text, which is a bit more. One Piece has a goal many other stories don't have. Example, look at how Dragon Ball, Naruto, and Bleach handle going just locations of importance. Usually they just sort of fly over to the fight, time skip over, or maybe have 1 or 2 instances where the journey is sort of shown. In early Dragon Ball, the journey was shown a lot more, but later on this is basically what happened. In fact, it got worse because Goku learned how to just teleport everywhere. In One Piece, every journey to a new location in itself is part of the story. In a world ridden with pirates, riding your boat to an island will have consequences. Going to a weird tropical island wearing a tank top will have consequences. You can get sick, attacked, lost, hit by the weather, tricked, so many things can happen. And Oda wants to and does show all of it. In fact, the reason they meet one of the crewmates named Chopper is for what I exactly described. Nami gets sick on a weird island and has to get a doctor or she will die. The consequences and things that happen to the characters, the encounters, it feels strangely grounded. And this is weird because the story is so goofy, but almost everything the characters do doesn't feel out of place in the world. Like, the world actually exists around them. There's even a panel where there is smoke coming out of the ocean, and Oda spends an entire page or two explaining that underwater volcanoes exist under the sea and create new islands, and that in thousands of years the oceans will look different, for almost what seems like no reason but to expand his world. Every character has loads of interactions, quirks, and things they want to say, just like people in real life do, almost like a Discord call. Oda wants you to learn about and really get involved with these characters, hearing everything they want to say without restricting them because it may come off as useless or whatever. He seems to genuinely believe how characters interact is important, and every little detail about his world he's been lovingly crafting since childhood, apparently, should be shared as much as it can. This makes the story hard to read if you're actually not into that, and for the West especially, it tends to be a little bit harder. Every single detail, every single thing said, all matter and will matter. So if you do like the series, want to reread it, or eventually get into it, you are rewarded with that love from the author and his story that no story really can compete with, which is why One Piece fans, they tend to be strong advocates for the series more so than a lot of people. Reading it is a journey you take with the characters and even the style will make that. And when you get into it and one day say, I actually love these guys, it's definitely a good experience and makes it worth it. One Piece isn't all good though. It's definitely a slog when I didn't like the characters. Oda also starts making One Piece in his early 20s, and while for people online, 20s might seem old and grown up, for a writer, your early 20s is very, very young to be making such large-scale work. Writing is usually something you get better at with age as you learn more things about the world and ways people work. So early 20s for writing a story is a huge feat on this level, but in this case, you can tell Oda grows up with One Piece and gets better as he gets older with it. And early on, One Piece has a lot of sort of useless exposition or unneeded extra exposition that's not needed even when information has been conveyed. And many of the mini stories are sort of uncreative in the sense that they're just One Piece recreations of popular stories, like Boy Who Cried Wolf or Oda making 2 Hachiko's story arcs in 100 chapters alone. And I'm not joking, he actually does. But it's still creative enough with the characters being people you generally are impressed by and root for. All in all, I think it is worth it in the long run, and even the short run isn't the worst of the big 3. So I think it does deserve a chance if you do like the big 3, but that's just my honest opinion as someone who has never been into One Piece and only read it literally this November. Anyways, I know that this may not have seemed like the most in-depth video of all time, but I feel like I should actually read or be caught up with the entire series before doing a full deep dive into the story. I just thought people would be interested in hearing my take on its beginning as a newer reader and how I think it kind of stacks up. Maybe in the future though, I can do a dive into One Piece. Just let me know what you guys think. And while I don't think it has the worst 75 chapters of the big 3, I do think by chapter 220 it sort of fell off, but then apparently it gets back better because by chapter 220, Dragon Ball is in the Saiyan saga, Naruto's done with part 1, Bleach is basically at the Arrancar arc, it just got done with the Soul Society, and then One Piece starts to go near the bottom, but then apparently it goes right back up again. So that is my final take. Hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time.